Welcome to Empowering Seniors. I'm your host, Katherine Ambrose. On this episode, we're talking about reversing Alzheimer's. Meet Dr. Heather Sandison. Dr. Sandison, thank you so much for being on the show.
It's a privilege to be here. Thank you.
So your book is available, I'm sure, for years for people, and this represents a lot of work that you've done. So tell us your background and what this book means to you.
Sure. So I started seeing patients with dementia in 2017. And at that time, the thought of reversing Alzheimer's, even the thought of stopping Alzheimer's, was foreign to everyone. And I came in as a skeptic. I didn't think it was possible. However, my mentor, Dr. Dale Bredesen, who wrote the book, The End of Alzheimer's, had presented at a conference, and the way he described the process of supporting someone with dementia made a lot of common sense to me. It was around stacking interventions that helped heal the cells of the brain, the neurons. And when we did that, when we put one thing on top of the other, diet and exercise and other lifestyle interventions, plus some medical interventions, what he saw and what he had published in peer-reviewed journals was that there was a possibility that people might actually get better. So as a skeptic, I went back after that training to my clinical practice, and lo and behold, despite my lack of confidence in it, I watched people get better, and not just one or two, but many people improve their cognitive function when I thought that that would have been impossible.
That's incredible. So you grew up in Hawaii, and now you practice in California, but seems like you're traveling all over, really on a mission to help people. So tell us a little bit about how this all came about for you.
So I was seeing patients in my clinical practice, and over time I was developing a reputation for helping people with dementia, and we had people calling with additional questions and constraints that would come up. As you well know, supporting seniors and dementia comes up often, and the complexities in their lives, whether it's relationships or financial constraints or any of the myriad of pieces that can come up as someone ages, these were happening to my patients and their families. And so I had a woman who called one day and said, hey, my uncle has cognitive decline. He's been diagnosed with dementia, and we want him to get the full experience that you're giving your patients at your clinic, but I can't stop what I'm doing. I'm in this sandwich generation where I have a full-time job and a family I'm raising. I can't stop and take care of him full-time, and this is a complex intervention. Where can I send him? And when I heard that, I thought, well, which senior community is offering this immersive experience where you don't have to worry about the diet, about the exercise, about the supplements or the medications? That's all done for you. And so we created an immersive experience in San Diego, and we've been so lucky to partner here in Wichita, in Kansas, with a second facility where we're seeing incredible results. After rolling out the community, we also were hearing from patients that we're not sure, if I put in the effort, the time, the money that it takes to do what you're describing, how likely is it that my loved one or I will get better? And I didn't know the answer to that very reasonable question. And so we were, again, very fortunate to have a philanthropist help us design and fund a clinical trial that we did in my office, where we saw that over 6 months, people with mild cognitive impairment improve their cognition 75% of the time.
That's incredible. So is it mainly lifestyle changes? Can people kind of maybe help prevent dementia?
Absolutely. That's such a great question. So I would love for none of people in my generation, I'm in my 40s, I would love for dementia to stop with the next generation. I would love for people who have a parent with dementia to be able to choose to make Alzheimer's optional, to choose to, at the very least, delay the onset of cognitive decline by engaging in these lifestyle practices. There are so many things that you can do to delay, prevent, and even reverse dementia and cognitive decline. And really, it's just about implementing them and getting them started. We were getting a lot of that feedback as well in my clinical practice, that although it made sense, although it seemed like a good idea, actually implementing was really challenging for people. It's hard to make behavioral changes when we have full cognitive capacity, let alone as we're aging and when things feel more overwhelming or we're going into that decline process. So we started doing some coaching, both online and in person, and that's really where the book came from, is how do we get this idea, these coaching practices, these behavioral changes, these diet changes, these exercise changes, sleep habit changes. How do we get the information in the hands of people in a way that allows them to implement at home so that they get the benefits?
So dementia and Alzheimer's, we've kind of used those terms a little bit together. Can you explain the difference between the two?
So dementia is an umbrella term. So under that umbrella, we have multiple types of dementia, of which Alzheimer's is the most common form. About 80% of dementias are Alzheimer's. Now there also includes frontotemporal dementia, vascular dementia, Lewy body dementia. There are other types of dementia, and what we see frequently is, particularly as people progress through the dementia process, they'll have a combination of neurodegenerative disease going on. So we'll see Lewy bodies present as well as beta amyloid plaques or tau proteins that characterize Alzheimer's. But there are some pretty distinct differences. For one, Alzheimer's affects women. About 2/3 of Alzheimer's patients are women, whereas frontotemporal dementia is something that tends to affect men and starts earlier, and often in the 50s or 60s, whereas Alzheimer's affects women after the age of 65, typically even later than that.
So I did not know that 80% of dementias were Alzheimer's, so that's really interesting. How important is it for someone to know what type of dementia it is?
You know, we use this diagnostic process to help people prepare. Lewy body dementia is characterized by paranoia, hallucinations, and the behavioral changes can often be much more jarring for the family, much more challenging. And so if I know that a patient has Lewy body dementia, then I want to make sure that they have caretaking set up, that they have a lot more involvement from other people in the community that can help to serve that family, because this is not going to be a one-person job. And
you're helping prepare the family for what is likely to happen, and so they know it's part of the disease process maybe, and not something that their loved one can help.
Right, absolutely. Understanding that this is a brain degenerative disease, that your loved one is not going to be the way that they were before, and to expect them to change, that can help us to have more compassion and also make it a little easier to go through that process. It's quite challenging because there isn't a pharmaceutical intervention for dementia that works. Despite billions of dollars that have been spent and decades of extremely smart people's time and effort and research, there is not a meaningful solution from a pharmaceutical perspective. And I wish that there were. If there were a pill or an IV that we could give people to stop the suffering associated with this disease, I would be the first to share it and yell it from the rooftops.
Because there's a lot of buzz about different drugs that are out there that are giving people hope. Do you think that maybe someday there will be pharmaceutical solutions?
I certainly hope so. I think that the best case scenario will be that these first generation drugs, the IVs that you hear about these days, the monoclonal antibodies for amyloid plaque, I hope that as they go through their second and third generations, they're going to be even more beneficial. And when we start combining them with the lifestyle that we know prevents and can even reverse the disease process, that is when I think we're going to get the best outcomes for people.
Speaking of the plaques, I'm wondering, how do you determine that someone has plaque?
Yeah, great question. So we can see some of this on imaging these days, and this is a rapidly changing field. So the detection of plaques is fantastic, and tau proteins, the changes, these misfolded proteins that characterize Alzheimer's, it's wonderful if we can see them ahead of the symptomatic changes. One of the things we know about Alzheimer's is that the changes in our brain are happening decades before the onset of symptoms, decades before you're not remembering your neighbor's name, or you keep losing your keys, or you can't calculate that tip. Decades before that, the changes are happening in the brain. And if we know they're there, then we can start to look at what I think is the most important piece. Why is there neurodegeneration?
And you believe that maybe in some cases, some of that can be reversed?
Absolutely, that's what we see. And at the very least, we can delay or prevent the onset of disease.
Okay, and so are all the answers in the book? What can you share with us about how you might be able to prevent or delay?
Absolutely. So many of the answers are in the book. And the reason we wrote the book was to make this approach accessible. It's a lot and it can feel overwhelming. And often when I'm getting started with a coaching client or a patient, where do I start? What do I do first? There's so much here: diet, exercise, sleep, stress management, the medical pieces. What do I get started with? And so I offer in the book, there's one of two places where I recommend people start. First, where it's easy. So if you've already been doing something, if you've already been going to church on Sundays, but there's a Bible study that's available on Tuesday, Thursday, and you're really engaged in that community and your friends are there, it's gonna be fun for you, but it's gonna give you that extra amount of socialization, maybe some intellectual and spiritual engagement. Make the change. Start going to those Tuesday, Thursday Bible studies in addition to church on Sunday, right? Start getting the benefit of a little bit more of something you're already doing.
Okay, maybe, so is it the socialization that's important there, that going to something and engaging?
Yeah, so what we talk through in the book are different pieces of different aspects. And what I don't want to have happen is for someone to hear this and go, I have to do everything today. It's really about taking bite-sized pieces and starting to get the wins. And so starting with either something that's easy and simple because you're already kind of halfway there, or starting with the thing that you know is going to give you the biggest change.
Okay.
So for a lot of people, that's diet. And so the diet that we recommend is an organic ketogenic diet. And this ketogenic state is where we go from burning sugar for fuel to burning fat for fuel. And the brain actually prefers to burn fat or ketones for fuel instead of glucose. It burns more cleanly, so we create less oxidative stress, one of the hallmarks of aging. It creates detoxification, so we get more of the toxins out of the system. It also helps with inflammation, reducing inflammation, and we create more energy more efficiently. ATP, or the adenosine triphosphate is the big word, for the fuel that our cells burn and run on. And when we have more energy in our brain, it's easier for us to think clearly. The brain, very interesting, the brain only makes up 2% of our body weight, but uses 20% of our energy every day.
Wow.
No matter, the heart is different because if we're exercising, of course, the heart needs more energy. The heart is going to burn more oxygen and more fuel. But the brain uses about 20% of our energy every day, no matter what. And so we need to feed that organ, and it loves to burn ketones for fuel.
Okay. And so what are good foods for the brain?
Great question. Some of my favorite foods for the brain are the fatty fish, cold water fish, like wild salmon, sardines, anchovies, if you can stand them. These cold water fish are full of omega-3s, and that can help to both fuel our brain if we're burning fat for fuel, but also helps with our brain. Much of our brain is made out of fats, including the myelin sheath that protects each of our neurons. So we want to make sure we have plenty of the substrate, basically the building blocks for healthy neurons. So we love cold water fish like salmon, sardines, and anchovies. We also love the brassica family vegetables. So these are green veggies that are in the family with broccoli, kale, cabbage, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts. All of the veggies in that category help us to detoxify, and they're full of nutrients. They are just jam-packed with the vitamins and minerals that our brain needs to run on. We also love amino acids. So anything, I'm a fan of grass-fed meats, so low-inflammatory meats that come from animals like beef or chicken or pork, that is going to help us with those amino acids that are necessary. They're the building blocks of our neurotransmitters. So many people who are familiar with dementia may have heard of Aricept, or you'll also hear it called donepezil. This is an acetylcholinesterase inhibitor. What we see is that people who are put on this medication, they often will do better, temporarily at least, because they're getting more acetylcholine. Choline is found in eggs. So if we use an egg-rich diet, we can help to increase choline in the brain. Getting those great animal proteins that are not going to stimulate inflammation, but actually give us those building blocks for neurotransmitters like dopamine, acetylcholine, our serotonin, all of GABA. All of these neurotransmitters help with our stress levels, our ability to go to sleep, our ability to maintain our mood throughout the day, but also our ability to remember things.
I'm wondering about grocery shopping. So buying eggs and the green vegetables in the grocery stores, how big of a difference does it make whether you just buy what is available for everyone versus being more selective and getting organic?
So I'm a proponent of do the best you can with what you've got.
Okay.
I don't want that to be an impediment to just getting started on a non-processed diet. The
Okay.
most important piece of a good, healthy diet is to make sure you're avoiding processed foods. And then, if you want to take it to the next level, I do recommend organic because of the herbicides and pesticides that are found in foods. Those can put more strain on our liver, more strain on our brain, more strain on our body. We think of this total toxic burden. When we look at toxicity, we think of chemical toxins that might be in pesticides and herbicides, maybe petrochemicals, we think of heavy metals, we'll think of the plastics. Also, being exposed to a moldy building, a water damaged building can expose us to mycotoxins. These types of toxins, they take a toll on our body. They require us to have more nutrients to get them out. They require us to basically do more work than we would have to if they weren't in our body. And so as much as possible, avoiding exposure to them can be helpful. Now, we can't avoid them all. And so picking and choosing, pick your poison is basically that we can use that term here. When we can't avoid petrochemicals or if we can't get organic, then we have to make sure that we're making good choices with our water or our air or our, how often we get our hair dyed or our nails done or things like that.
So getting your hair done, your nails done, those kind of things can maybe also add some toxic components to your body.
They have the potential to. Now with toxicity, when I share that piece with people, this actually is a lot of fun because there are great ways to increase our regular detox pathways. So every cell in our body is consuming fuel and creating waste. And we need to be able to take the trash out. So just thinking through, how does our body already do that? And can we amplify that? Can we do that a little bit better? Can we sweat? Right? This comes back to exercise. But when we're sweating, maybe we're getting in a sauna, maybe we're exercising more vigorously, but through our sweat, we get rid of toxins. Every time we use the bathroom, we get rid of a significant amount of toxins. So every time we exhale, we get rid of toxicity. So having an exercise process, making sure that we're seeing the doctor if we're not using the bathroom every day, making sure that we're drinking plenty of water so that we can cleanse our blood through our kidneys, making sure that we have a great diet that gives enough nutrients to our liver so that it can get through phase 1 and phase 2 detox processes. Just that alone can often make a lot of people feel much better.
Oh, that's good news. So kind of the things that we already know, there's really good reason to do that. So what I see is that Alzheimer's or dementia can be people's greatest fear, that people want to retain their memory and their cognitive ability. So how do you talk to patients or loved ones about recent diagnosis and about the journey?
Yeah, understandably so. Alzheimer's is the most feared disease. When we lose our mind, our memories, we become a shell of ourselves, we lose our dignity, and we often become dependent on people around us, for better or worse. And that process is something that everyone wants to avoid. You are in the real estate industry. You have helped many people make that transition, whether they're downsizing or moving into a senior living community. And no one really wants to move into a facility.
Right.
No one wants that or would choose that. And so I think that the misconception around Alzheimer's, so many people have been told for so long, is that there's nothing you can do. And that's factually inaccurate. There's actually an overwhelming amount of things that you can do. And although that can feel overwhelming, what we want to do is just get started and get started as soon as possible, as early as possible. So if your mom or your dad or your aunts and uncles, your grandparents have had Alzheimer's or dementia, the time to start preventing it is today. We can do so much more quickly with less effort, with less money, if we start earlier in the process. Now, if there is a diagnosis, again, I think the time to start is now. But many people describe this experience of not wanting to know anything about Alzheimer's until the day that there is a diagnosis, and then they feel like they need to know everything yesterday. And that sense of overwhelm, of helplessness, I think is something that really, that's why I do what I do, is to give people tools. What can I do at home? Now, a lot of people don't realize that deciding to be a caregiver for a parent or a spouse comes with its own risk. So anywhere from 2.5 to 6 times the risk of being diagnosed with dementia or Alzheimer's later in your life if you're a caregiver versus if you are not. So I highly recommend that people do not become martyrs to this disease, that you get help, that you share the responsibility. I know that can bring up a lot of guilt for people, and culturally many people want to take care of their parent, keep them at home. And yet what I implore people to do is pick up the book and do everything together. So if you're gonna help mom or dad, if you're gonna do that, make sure that you get on the right diet, that you prioritize your sleep, that you prioritize your exercise, that you create a stress management practice that you do daily so that you don't go down that same path. We've got to protect your brain as much as theirs.
Well, that's good to know. I'm also wondering if you see a lot of people that they don't want to get diagnosed or they put it off for a very long time. What is behind the fear of getting diagnosed, and what's the benefit of getting diagnosed?
So what we see is that many people in my practice, I will ask, have you seen a neurologist? Do you have a diagnosis? For me, it's very clear that they have dementia, probably Alzheimer's, and they say no. What would they do for me? There aren't any drugs that they can give me, and they're probably just going to take away my driver's license. So I'm just coping, I'm trying to hide it, I don't want anyone to know, and I'm going to try to do this, or we're going to try to figure it out for as long as we can on our own. And that crushes me because they don't feel support. And they aren't getting the message that there's actually so much that we can do to delay, prevent, and even reverse the disease process. And I think also that delay in getting care means it's going to be harder. Whenever we progress through the disease process, the further along it is, the harder it is to get a win, the harder it is to reverse the process.
Okay, so find out early. There's a lot of reasons to do that, so you're aware and you can take action and do something rather than wait until you've gotten further down the road with it.
Precisely. And if you know that your loved ones who you're genetically related to have dementia, then the time to start is now. Get tested.
How would you go about getting tested?
Yeah, so there are multiple ways that you can navigate the process. If you're starting to notice cognitive decline, I recommend seeing your primary care provider first, right? Lack of sleep, depression, anxiety. There are lots of things that can be associated with cognitive decline that are not Alzheimer's. And so we want to test for and treat those things early on and get you back to full cognitive capacity. Now, if it looks like things are progressing down the path of dementia, then looking at your genetic status. So ApoE is a genetic single nucleotide polymorphism, or a SNP, that we can look at. We get one from mom, one copy from mom, and one from dad. And it's either a 2, a 3, or a 4. So the entire population has a 13% chance of being diagnosed with dementia in their lifetime. If you have one copy of ApoE4 from mom or dad, you go up to a 30% chance of being diagnosed with dementia in your lifetime. If you have 2 copies, you're ApoE4 positive, you actually go up to more than 50% chance of being diagnosed with Alzheimer's. So we want to know this early on. If you have a lot of dementia in your family, this is something you want to know. I think for many people 10 years ago, 20 years ago, they thought, there's nothing I can do, so why would I want to know? It'll just give me anxiety and keep me from sleeping. But now, if we know that, then in your 20s, 30s, 40s, we can start looking at what my mentor, Dr. Bredesen, calls a cognoscopy. And so if we know ahead of time, if we're armed with the information, that genetic information, then we can work a little harder than our neighbor or our spouse or somebody else we're not genetically related to.
Well, very good. Well, thank you for arming us with the good information so we can do just that. Thank you so much for being on the show.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And thank you for watching. If you have questions about this topic or anything else that we cover, give us a call at 316-686-4500 or email us at empoweringseniors@kpts.org. I'm Katherine Ambrose, and I'll see you on the next Empowering Seniors.